to our LACIS lecture series. Today I have the pleasure of introducing two friends and colleagues. And I want to start off by saying that they actually do what we all wish we did, which we all talk about interdisciplinarity, we all talk about mixed methods, we all talk about that. They actually do it, and so I commend them for that. So Kata Bailin has a PhD in Romantic languages from the University of Chicago. She teaches here in the Spanish and Portuguese department. Her most recent book is called In Search of Alternative Biopolitics, in 2015. I'm going to mispronounce your last name, I'm sorry. Subnarayan has a PhD in zoology and works here as a scientist of biology and society. His most recent book is about bees. It's called Science, Politics, and Honeybee Health. Today, they're going to be presenting to us on their most recent work. It's a book that's forthcoming, and it is about how humans and seeds resist genetical manipulation. So let's join me, please, in welcoming Kata and Sai.
It's actually a paper that's forthcoming. We are going to be talking about. The book will be forthcoming in some future. It's still a distant future. All right, so while the discourses of the publicity of genetically engineered organisms promise to solve the world from hunger and guarantee sustainable environmental management, the resistance to genetically engineered monocrops has been steadily growing in the lands of Hispanic agricultures. Argentina is the third world largest producer of genetically engineered soy, so-called Roundup Ready soy, which is resistant to Roundup herbicide, Roundup, which kills everything around it except the soy itself. But it has grown the genetically engineered soy the longest in South America. Roundup Ready soy has transformed its landscapes, it has transformed its culture, and it has divided Argentinian people. It has also prompted mutation of weeds, turning them to so-called superweeds, which became also resistant to the herbicide Roundup. These weeds, ironically, has become allies of humans who are fighting against the genetically engineered monocrops. In Mexico, human alliance with corn, culturally grounded, has become an obstacle to begin commercial planting of genetically engineered maize. So in this context, we are going to be talking about our research in Argentina and Paraguay in 2015 and a short pilot study that we did in the summer of 2016 in Mexico, and where we plan to return this summer. We probably won't have much time to mention details of Paraguay, just because of the lack of time here.
So good afternoon. I'll say a little bit about what we did in Argentina. We examined human entanglements with genetically engineered soy plants, farmers, scientists, and also the resistant superweeds, mainly a particular species called Palmer amaranth, about which you'll hear about more, as well as alternative crops, focusing again in particular on amaranth, whose varieties are not only including superweed categories, but also cereal crops. And so we'll go conceptually from resistance, interspecies resistance to bioeconomy, to this concept of re-existence coined by Walter Mignolo to mean sets of decolonizing discourses and practices often inspired by pre-colonial ways of living and thinking. we want to invert the habitual way of looking at how technoscientific developments and society interplay with each other. And we want to ask, instead of asking how people control plants, we want to ask how plants mediate particular socio-cultural and political developments. Since we are not completely convinced by plants having agency and the concept of agency attributing them to non-humans, we substitute and go with the idea of Levi Bryant, who thinks of the whole world in terms of gravity and turns everything into objects with varying gravitational forces and trajectories. So for example, there is the idea of bright objects which have very strong gravity and turn objects around them or pull objects around them into their satellites, becoming the principle of the traffic around them. And in our story, Roundup Ready soy, or the genetically engineered soy, is a bright object. We also have rogue objects, which have surprising trajectories as they appear and disappear unexpectedly, and they also subvert sometimes and destabilize the gravitational force and pulling force of bright objects. And in our story, the mutant superweed amaranth is a rogue object. We're also adopting Donna Haraway's way of emphasizing the particular vantage points from which knowledges are constructed. And we counterpose the vision from above, mediated by satellite science and technologies, to the visions from below that require one to physically be there at a certain place, at a certain time, and facing affected people and plants, bending, touching, smelling, and tasting the soil, so to speak. Building on research in the environmental humanities, science and technology studies, and multi-species ethnographies, where humans and non-humans co-evolve and influence each other, our goal is to open new patterns of understanding the emerging bioeconomy of genetically engineered organisms in the Hispanic world. While we can't match the depth of analysis and study within any particular disciplinary framework, such as on the Roundup Ready soy economy in Argentina, what we are hoping for, what we're looking for, are synergies between different fields and their insights through the bridging concept of interspecies. We discover that struggles surrounding genetically engineered crops can be seen as an exemplar of synergies between culture, politics, and live tissues and science, where mutagenesis affects not only cells and bodies, but also surrounding ecologies and social structures, and even art. Our methodology, then, by necessity, is a transdisciplinary one, by which we mean something that's focused on real-worldly issues and applies concepts and tools from different fields as needed toward building new understandings, focused on a solutions, and better forecasting of future tendencies.
So soil, a bright object. Soil has always been very tolerant of difficult conditions, but it never competed well with weeds due to its high nutritional value. As the world population grew and demand for the soy increased in the world markets, soy has been chosen to be genetically engineered in Monsanto labs to be resistant to the herbicide Roundup, whose main ingredients is glyphosate. We are thinking that it's not an accident that the tool for inserting the gene from bacteria to soy is called actually gene gun, because as Gustavo Grobo-Patel, who is in Argentina known as the king of soy, and is an author of a TED Talk, whose fragment I'll show in a moment, he says that this operation led to production of the greatest arm of the 21st century, which is the mastery of photosynthesis. Since soy has become resistant to glyphosate, glyphosate became its inseparable companion, in fact, its bodyguard. In fact, we could see that soy has been gunned down to become a hybrid, soy-glyphosate hybrid, which changed its nature of originally benign plant to malignant and deadly. So this image comes from sort of sui generis essay by Eduardo Molinari, who is an artist and a writer, and he refers what he calls Argentinian transgenic culture to the campaign of the desert, La Campaña del Desierto, while the campaign of the desert of 1870s has marginalized and destroyed native people in Argentinian South. In the name of civilization, the campaign of soy has done away with small farmers, and again it cut into the native reservations. Only during the first 10 years of so-called shojización, 160,000 of families have lost their livelihood in Argentina. Some of these people went to the cities and became urban poor. Others managed to acquire credits and themselves became soy growers or soy workers. So the first effect of soy taking over Argentinian fields is the change of countryside, transforming it into what local people call the green desert. And again, this image comes from Eduardo Molinari's Soy Children, which also comments on the transformation of social hierarchy and structure in the countryside and in the cities, where we witness the soy-inflated real estate boom. Soy has also redefined the idea of failure and success and redefined poverty. So, Gustavo Grobo-Patel, an agronomist and a millionaire who bases his richness on huge plantations of soy that extends through Argentina and Paraguay, in his TED Talk, talks with a huge enthusiasm about the time when it became possible to engineer plants in the way, design plants in the way that you used to design cars, turning plants into little factories which will be able to produce in their bodies what we used to produce in the factories. But in his discourse, these factories are amazing because they are powered by solar energy, and instead of contaminating, they in fact absorb CO2 and produce oxygen. So according to Grobo-Patel, the real revolution is happening right now in the countryside, and where there is space and water, and of course after human and non-human obstacles are removed, Argentina is now turning into England of the 18th century. So in the video that accompanies Grobo-Patel talk, we can see Earth from the satellite. They actually are using satellitarian technology for farming. And very first zooming, you see we are landing on a soy field, and in a second we'll see agronomists looking at an iPad mapping the terrain of soy production. In the subsequent sequences, you will be seeing how the image zooms in and out from screens of iPads and phones, confusing the viewer, and this confusion between screen-mediated visions of reality and reality itself are very characteristic of the alienation from the reality in which the knowledge of bioeconomy is being produced. So in that very fast zoom that you saw in the beginning of that shot, you could see how the whole life of the planet was being incorporated into the human subjective, productive subjectivity, and it reflected the desire to transform the whole planet in the very same way as the plant of soy has been transformed. And it's worth noting that there is only one letter of difference between plant and planet, and in some etymologies they are in fact connected. So at the end of his talk, Gustavo Groboko-Patel redefines also poverty. In his opinion, if only people embrace proper technologies, the age of universal well-being is very close. We are going to get rid of the poverty. For that reason, he insists the whole society should be prepared to embrace technology in all its dimensions.
And Groboko-Patel's ideas are already constitutive of contemporary Argentinian culture, which constructs successful social models in relation to consumption of technology. On huge billboards along the main highway from Buenos Aires outward to the provinces, as we traveled on buses to various parts of Argentina's countryside, we would often repeatedly see the billboard of a young boy fashionably dressed and surrounded by technological gadgets. And as he rests his head on a pillow, the gigantic letters read, "Feel comfortable with technology." And judging by the clothes of the boy and by the interiors in which he's having comfort, the technology is not only envisioned here as a means to success, but also as a mark of class.
So yes, in the gravitational field of soy, there are a number of different kinds of violence occurring. There is the structural violence of different hierarchies that are being produced, which Sai commented upon. There is also some of the direct violence, more in the case of Paraguay, where people are forced to be selling their farmland. But in the Argentinian case, I think the most significant is the slow violence of toxicity, which shows in long spans of time as symptoms of different illnesses are coming to the surface. And Medalla Vieira Vasquez is one of the most amazing doctors, scientists, and activists who is fighting against the Argentinian toxic bioeconomy. And he made a number of studies. One of the recent studies in Monte Maíz. Monte Maíz is one of the little towns which is completely surrounded by transgenic plantations, soy but also corn, where fumigations are growing every year. So he did a health study with a big team of students and collaborators that showed that in this town, the first cause of human death is cancer. While in the rest of the country, where in the places which are not surrounded by transgenic plantations, it's only 5th or 6th cause of death. And this is not the only report. Another example, commissioned by the government of Chaco report shows that in Chaco, which is another area which is where corn and soy is very heavily fumigated by glyphosate, in Chaco, and the amount of hypothyroidism and birth malformations is 3 times larger than in the rest of the country.
So paraphrasing Michel Foucault, where there is violence, there is resistance. And as we mentioned in the introduction, this resistance is both human and non-human, and these are interconnected networks of resistance that we focus on. In Levi Bryant's ontology, bright objects are sometimes destabilized by rogue objects. I'm quoting Bryant now. Rogue objects are the new social movements, species, and technologies. They are the revolutionaries, unquote. So, among a growing number of weeds that have mutated and acquired resistance to glyphosate, according to multinational seed and pesticide corporation Bayer, Palmer amaranth, next to other species of amaranth and a plant called Sorgo de Aleppo, is one of the most dangerous to soy growers. And it's able to decrease soy's yield by over 70%. And you can see here in this picture a field of soy taken over by amaranth. And once it's taken over, the roots, the very deep, long roots of this plant make it really hard to remove by hand, but manually. So growers usually resort to adding and multiplying the fumigations of herbicides. And if that doesn't work, growers are abandoning these soy fields and in a way setting the stage for a third nature of sorts in terms of secondary growth forests to come back. Before this third nature comes, though, the amount of herbicides and pesticides that are applied in an attempt to remove these resistant superweeds is just escalating to such a degree that nearby communities of humans, people, are feeling the effects. And a number of collective actions have arisen and have actually in Argentina been successful at the local municipal level in establishing buffer zones, some distance between the fumigated plantations of soy and communities of people. And so here we actually see a material synergy between the rising resistance of weeds such as amaranth and the response to those weeds by farmers in connection with the rising resistance of people who start seeing the effects, feeling the effects of those fumigations in their communities.
Yeah, as if plants prompted people to resist. So when Syngenta published this publicity of genetically engineered soy on a map encompassing parts of Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Bolivia as United Republic of Soy, it made evident the neo-colonial discourses of multinational bioeconomy. And as a response to that, activists have recruited amaranth as a symbolic hero of the resistance. Right, and here is again, sui generis essay, investigative journalism novel by Ricardo Cerrulla, who is a famous environmental journalist recently awarded by his TV program La Venganza del Amaranto, The Revenge of Amaranth. Pamphlets, videos, manifestos are calling on amaranth nature, evoking also its history as a sacred plant of Aztecs and also the peoples who lived under Inca's empire, that was destroyed by Spanish colonizers, in part because it was connected to religious rituals, pagan religious rituals, but also because in some publications, apparently Spaniards were aware that amaranth was what made native people strong due to its nutritional values.
Right, so these discourses, especially amongst activists, are expressing a vision of an active plant nature that's embedded in a pre-Columbian past, but also in today's popular culture, revealing the biological qualities of amaranth reflected by its name. In Greek, amaranto means unyielding, unwilting, and is devoted to goddess Artemis, who is symbolized by her warrior qualities. The alliance between people resisting the Roundup-ready soy bioeconomy and these superweeds is not only metaphorical, as we mentioned, but also material. And we already mentioned one of the material connections. in which not only people are getting fumigated, but also these super weeds that are trying to survive amongst the soy plantations. There is a different register in which the material connection also plays out, and that register is one in which activists are making mud balls filled with amaranth seeds and throwing them into the soy plantations. They call these mud balls amaranth bombs. And as much as we dislike the militaristic rhetoric here, we have to admit that what's happening in the fields in Argentina between Roundup Ready soy and amaranth resembles a war-like situation. But this is a vegetal guerrilla war that's inspired certain strategies of human resistance.
So, among a number of species of amaranth, there are also edible ones. On the right side of the screen, you can see Amaranthus caudatus, which grows in the Andes, and on the right, Amaranthus hypochondriacus, which is dominant in Mexico. They are called famine plants because they can grow where other plants wither. They can take over a month without the rain, and also they establish malnourished humans' health in a particularly fast way due to very easily to assimilate protein and due to content of lysine, which tones human immune system. We visited two cooperatives of edible amaranth. One is called Tatahuasa, and it's led by Dalmacio Sandoval. It's in Salta, Argentina. It's just a family cooperative. And a much larger project in Tehuacan, Puebla, center in Tehuacan, Puebla, but which actually coordinates work of over 1,000 families in 3 states, which is Guerrero, Chiapas, and Oaxaca, called Proyecto Alternativas, related to the Make Quali, which produces amaranth snacks in Mexico. And both these projects, in a very interesting way, are examples of what we call re-existence. As I mentioned in the introduction, re-existence is this concept of Mignolo, where decolonizing discourses are formed through a dialogue established with pre-colonial ways of life, strategies of production, and also colonial modes of resistance. So each of these projects deserves its own presentation, but let me just tell you that each of them is focused on alleviation of poverty, alleviation of racial tensions in their areas, and each of them owes its success to certain discoveries of the pre-colonial strategies of irrigation and growing of the plants. And the leader of this community has made very thorough research in codices from Mexican colonial times.
So, a similar kind of indigenous inspiration for re-existence can be observed in various other points of resistance. And one that we want to mention and kind of emphasize today is the story of a core group of activists resisting the construction of Monsanto's genetically engineered seed factory that was going to be one of the largest in the world and was going to be sited in one of the poorest neighborhoods of a city named Cordoba, and this neighborhood, the name is Malvinas Argentinas. The activists in this neighborhood were very aware of the interspecies alliance with plants. The inhabitants of the town, in resisting the factory, created an assembly movement called Malvinas Lucha por la Vida, with all the implications that the term has for human health, but also for the planet. On a wall by the Malvinas bus stop, there's a graffiti, shown here, representing the idea of Malvinas fighting for life, depicting human and plant coexistence. Malvinas, mostly a white dormitory town, ironically, in a way, reimagines its agricultural landscapes through an idealized vision of a past indigenous life represented by an indigenous woman, connoting freedom, organic purity, and human connection to nature.
Another example of their existence also comes from close to Malvinas. Esta fábrica parece que la ha diseñado el diablo. This factory seems to be designed by the devil himself, says Medardo Avila Vasquez when we interview him in Cordoba about the factory, which you will see in a moment in a little video that we made on the background. This factory was going to be the largest factory of seed in the world, and it was placed by Monsanto purposefully in one of the poorest communities of Cordoba, in a distance, very short distance of a primary school. The seed was going to be soaked in fipronil. Fipronil is a very toxic substance whose half-life, Medardo Avila Vasquez thinks is around 6 years. And the wind, the way the winds go, the wind was going to go from the factory and was going to hit first the primary school and then next the town. So the environmental impact report on this factory was not approved by Argentinian institutions, but still Monsanto kept constructing the factory. Just right now you will see, yeah, this is it. This is the skeleton of the factory. So they kept constructing the factory, and then it was only then when the inhabitants of the town rose up and they planted themselves in front of the trucks and blocked the entrance gates to the factory. And after a few weeks and 3 battles with police, Monsanto decided that it was not worth for them to persist, and they left. But when they left, they never said that they were leaving for good. So a group of youth decided to stay there, camp, to make sure that they would not come back, or make sure that they will warn the community if they saw tracks of the workers returning to work. And in the very beginning of that video that was actually starting, you saw the shacks in which for 2 years these kids were staying, right? This is their library, this is their camp. For 2.5 years without electricity, running water, protected from rain only by these shacks. What did they do? They grew organic gardens. They grew organic gardens and they published cartonera books. And in these cartonera books, they said that, paraphrasing Giorgio Agamben, in the manifesto, they said, world has changed into a concentration camp where, quote, multinationals are devouring the whole life in order to defecate money. It is important for them, according to that manifesto, that the new world be designed precisely at the gate of Monsanto factory. Right, so this organic garden and then this publishing cartonera is emerging at the gate of that skeleton of that factory which is being built. And interestingly, the way they imagine, these are drawings made by them, some of them are visibly very talented, the way they imagine this re-existence of the future world is through working on new seeds.
So while Hispanic countries no doubt share a number of cultural values and historical events, there are important differences between their local cultures of the field. And we ask how these differences are responsible for the contrasting developments and movements of resistance to genetically engineered crops in the areas we study. While in Argentina, genetically engineered soy has spread to over 50% of all agricultural lands before any significant resistance arose. In Mexico, the battle against GE corn, as Kata mentioned, has mobilized arguably one of the largest and up until now successful resistance movement in Latin America to not allow for the commercial planting of GE corn. And so we are asking if the strength of the opposition against GE corn in Mexico can be attributed to the fact that that there is a culture of maize, which constitutes a foundation for diverse ethnic cultures in the region, which go back over millennia. In other words, can we talk about an interspecies alliance?
Right. So this is the an image from Popol Vuh, image to which that can be referred to Popol Vuh, which tells the story how gods made human beings, and they made it 4 times, and only the 4th time when they made it out of corn, human beings were successful and successfully functioned. So Mexican activists made this huge mosaic in Zócalo, in Central Plaza of Mexico, made out of actually corn, in which they announced that without corn there is no country, sin maíz no hay país, and they stand in this campaign anti-GMO as hijos del maíz, meaning children of corn. And it's not only activists. There are a number of artists of different kind which solidarize with the movement. Performance artists, Joshua Rodriguez, Liliana Felipe, painters, Francisco Toledo, filmmakers. Alex Rivera was here, and recently a beautiful movie Sunu by Teresa Camus, from which you can see images, alert general public to the fact that Mexican meaning of life has been constructed for thousands of years around milpa, the traditional ecosystem of Mexican agriculture, where a number of plants coexist. This is actually an image from an exposition that was organized in Jardín Botánico de la UNAM last year, where 18 international artists presented their works in defense of Mexican maize. So this is, for example, Damián Ortega representation of Mexican body, but this is the genetic material made out of corn. This is the DNA of Mexico represented as a corn mosaic. And this is a very interesting sculpture called La Bestia, the beast, which is the name given to the train that takes immigrants from all Central America to the United States, and then ironically returns filled with transgenic grain. And between 2010 and 2013, there were 6 times that it derailed, causing terrible transgenic spills. So the contamination is a big problem there.
And it's not only artists and farmers who are resisting genetically engineered maize in Mexico, but there is a serious movement of scientists as activists as well. Last summer in 2016, we had the good fortune of speaking to Dr. Elena Alvarez Buya, who is one of the foremost plant geneticists in Mexico. And she expressed some of the concerns that other scientists have regarding genetically engineered maize, which is one that the ancestor of maize, called teotzinte, happens to also be growing in Mexico. And the fear is that with the introduction of genetically engineered maize, there could be a movement of the genetically engineered traits from GE maize to teotzinte, which would essentially eliminate the ancestor from which maize came. On the other hand, there's also a different kind of fear, which is that the GE maize traits, if and when they enter into teotzinte, could turn teotzinte itself into a sort of superweed that subverts and takes over other varieties of maize. So there are these two mirror images of fear about what could happen with the official introduction of GE maize, and hence the resistance to it. To some degree, scientists have already documented the movement of genetically engineered traits from maize across the border in the United States to wilder varieties of indigenous maize in Mexico. So this is not based on pure fantasy. And in a weird twist, in Spain, some of these fears are playing out right now. So it turns out that we don't know how, teotzinte from somewhere in Mesoamerica has landed in Spain in 2014 and is become a superweed in the genetically engineered corn plantations in various provinces in Spain. Spain, as you may know, is one of the largest producers of GE maize in Europe and the Hispanic world. In 2014, invading bodies of teotzinte were documented in Aragon province, which is one of the largest maize-growing provinces in Spain. And it forced actually some Spanish farmers to abandon their crop, and also prompted, and say a little bit about what we did in Argentina. We examined human entanglements with genetically engineered soy plants, farmers, scientists, and also the resistant superweeds, mainly a particular species called Palmer amaranth, about which you'll hear about more, as well as alternative crops, focusing again in particular on amaranth, whose varieties are not only including superweed categories, but also cereal crops. And so we'll go conceptually from resistance, interspecies resistance to bioeconomy, to this concept of re-existence coined by Walter Mignolo, to mean sets of decolonizing discourses and practices often inspired by pre-colonial ways of living and thinking. We want to invert the habitual way of looking at how technoscientific developments and society interplay with each other. And we want to ask, instead of asking how people control plants, we want to ask how plants mediate particular socio-cultural and political developments. Since we are not completely convinced by plants having agency and the concept of agency attributing them to non-humans, we substitute and go with the idea of Levi Bryant, who thinks of the whole world in terms of gravity and turns everything into objects with varying gravitational forces and trajectories. So for example, there is the idea of bright objects which have very strong gravity and turn objects around them or pull objects around them into their satellites, becoming the principle of the traffic around them. And in our story, Roundup Ready soy, or the genetically engineered soy, is a bright object. We also have rogue objects, which have surprising trajectories as they appear and disappear unexpectedly, and they also subvert sometimes and destabilize the gravity.
It's actually a paper that's for scanning. We are going to be talking about. The book will be for scanning in some future. It's still a distant future. All right, so while the discourses of the publicity of genetically engineered organisms promise to solve the world from hunger and guarantee sustainable environmental management, the resistance to genetically engineered monocrops has been steadily growing in the lands of Hispanic agricultures. Argentina is the third world largest producer of genetically engineered soy, so-called Roundup Ready soy, which is resistant to Roundup herbicide, Roundup, which kills everything around it except the soy itself. But it has grown the genetically engineered soy the longest in South America. Roundup Ready soy has transformed its landscapes, it has transformed its culture, and it has...
To our LACIS lecture series. Today I have the pleasure of introducing two friends and colleagues. And I want to start off by saying that they actually do what we all wish we did, which we all talk about interdisciplinarity, we all talk about mixed methods, we all talk about that they actually do it. And so I commend them for that. So Kata Bailin has a PhD in Romantic languages from the University of Chicago. She teaches here in the Spanish and Portuguese department. Her most recent book is called In Search of Alternative Biopolitics, in 2015. Sai, I'm going to mispronounce your last name, I'm sorry. Subnarayan has a PhD in zoology and works as a scientist of biology and society. His most recent book is about bees. It's called Science, Politics, and Honeybee Health. Today, they're going to be presenting to us on their most recent work. It's a book that's forthcoming, and it is about how humans and seeds resist genetical manipulation. So let's join me, please, in welcoming Kata and Sai.
Divided Argentinian people. It has also prompted mutation of weeds, turning them to so-called superweeds, which became also resistant to the herbicide Roundup. These weeds, ironically, has become allies of humans who are fighting against the genetically engineered monocrops. In Mexico, human alliance with corn, culturally grounded, has become an obstacle to begin commercial planting of genetically engineered maize. So in this context, we are going to be talking about our research in Argentina and Paraguay in 2015 and a short pilot study that we did in the summer of 2016 in Mexico and where we plan to return this summer. We probably won't have much time to mention details of Paraguay just because of the lack of time here.
So good afternoon. I'll